Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider. Today, I am so excited to have Laurel Buckner with us from BHP Ventures. Laurel, welcome.
Thanks, Nicholas. I'm so glad to be here.
So, I always like to start by asking, what was your journey into corporate venturing?
Yeah, maybe I have a different background from some of your other guests. I think that's really a power of corporate venture capitalists that we do come from many backgrounds since we work often with incredibly large companies, and not unlike yourself and myself at BHP, the world's largest mining company. I actually started my career as an attorney. At this point, I've got about half my career practicing law and about half my career being an investor. It's good to be looking back on that. I was at a big firm when I started in Seattle, where I currently live and run the global group from. I have an LLM in tax, so I have an advanced law degree in tax law. I started out my career as practicing international tax, mergers and acquisitions, and corporate law. From there, which I very much enjoyed, I saw many of my compatriots going to Microsoft at that time when I was practicing, and I have always been very interested in technology. So I went from a big law firm to a small VC-backed technology company, which was really exciting. I did M&A for Dell for a little bit and then was recruited to start a corporate venture capital fund for a publicly traded company on the West Coast. And that's where my investing career began.
Okay. I'm going to have a few things to unpack, but can you also talk about how you got into BHP?
Absolutely. I had the benefit, my last position, I was working for Riverstone, which is a natural resources private equity firm in New York. And as a result of that experience, I spent time actually in critical minerals, power generation, thinking about solar, other forms of energy generation, as well as batteries, new materials in batteries, and critical minerals. So that was my first foray into critical minerals, looking at mined magnets, looking at alternatives. A lot of the things that are in the news today, I was thinking about back then, which was pretty exciting in terms of thinking about trends, and had the opportunity to get into conversation with a member of BHP who had told me they were looking for someone to run their corporate venture capital arm. I had that experience previously as an investor, and then with my experience also in natural resources, we started talking more and more about that. And lo and behold, after many conversations, had the opportunity to move over and run the group.
Very nice. So, then you've been invited to join BHP Ventures to run the firm. BHP Ventures was launched before you joined. And so I want to touch about this experience because I think that's going to become more and more common as we see more and more CVCs. You're going to need people who have experience joining to run a CVC that's already been ongoing. Can you share maybe how you address the first 30 days of you joining BHP Ventures, what it is you did, you looked, what was the priorities you set? Because that's going to be something our audience, many of them are going to at some point be asked to join to lead a CVC that's already ongoing, what it is they should be thinking about.
Oh, that's a great question. BHP is 90,000 people globally with operations in Australia, Chile, Canada. It's just incredible in terms of joining a global operation. There are folks on the ventures team that are in Singapore, across the United States and Australia. So for me, when I first joined, really in the first 30 days, it was getting my arms around the folks that were already on the team. It's really an incredible group that I was so fortunate to join. They made their first investment about 5 years before I started. So it was pretty mature function for sure. They had incredible processes in place, the way they thought about investment. They had a great portfolio. I think that was truly the envy of many venture funds, just as an investment portfolio. So I really felt like I stepped in to a car that was already traveling very fast. And so for me, it was just getting my bearings around not only the team that did an incredible job bringing me up to speed internally around the way that we did things within BHP Ventures, but also who were the people within BHP that would be important for me to meet, understand who they were. And so they created an onboarding pack for me, and I got on the airplane and had the opportunity to fly to many different places to meet people in person. And that I think was invaluable for, again, stepping into an existing fund at a very large global company.
Okay. Now, before you joined, you probably had some alignment with the top management about what should be the goals. Maybe the goals were please keep it going the same way, please make some changes. Any tips about how you align before you even join about what it is you're going to bring to the firm?
And we talked a lot about strategy. We talked a lot about the current portfolio and the types of things that the team was doing for sure. And as when you're in the interview process, it's as much of diligence for yourself to better understand the opportunity that you're stepping into. So I continued through all of those conversations to be more and more intrigued, not only by the maturity of the function and the team and what they had built, but also how BHP, I would say, really thinks about venturing in terms of being able to keep an eye on technology trends and what's coming over the horizon. So we talked a lot about that. I do think the strategy itself, we were continuing and have continued. But the most important in today's world, I think, is really listening and being able to pivot into the growth areas and the trends because the technology trends are just really evolving so quickly now. And so, again, it was about effective communication internally about the trends that we're seeing and and how that would be informing the strategy with respect to individual investments that we would be making. I feel really lucky at BHP. I report into the Chief Development Officer, which is an incredible woman named Catherine Raw. She has just great experience also being an investor, being a CFO at a mining company, and she leads the strategy function. So it's myself, business development, M&A and strategy are the functions that report into her. And so we, unlike other corporate venture capital arms that might report to the CFO or might report to the chief technology officer, I report into strategy. And so thinking about what our strategy is with respect to investments and then how we make those decisions based on the strategy of the company overall is an important, I think, piece of where BHP Ventures fits in the overall BHP outlook and strategy.
So I think that's fascinating, and maybe this is where I want to double down. BHP, from the outside, is this massive, successful industrial company, but you wouldn't think technology as the first thing about BHP. And here you have a strategic function, which is all about, I think you said, pivoting into growth trends. Can you speak to how much of that strategic function augment BHP and how much of BHP Ventures is augmenting that strategy?
I think the strategy and how we think about executing on our current business and opportunity is really led certainly by our department, but in large partnership also with the other folks that are on the C-suite with our CDO. And so our technology function, we spend a lot of time with them thinking about where they're going. Our innovation group, which is called BHP Invent, that is taking later TRL technologies and running pilots with our assets. So this is really, I would say, an interdisciplinary approach. Ventures sits alongside, and our exploration function, which is based in Toronto too. So we spend a lot of time with those other groups as they're also touching and moving and listening to the organization. And then we work in concert with getting feedback from what are the needs of the organization, and then also what are the trends that we're seeing, as well as our strategy arm that are my colleagues. We talk a lot about what are trends that we're seeing in the future. So it's really, as I say, multidisciplinary, as opposed to ventures certainly does not work in a silo. And so as a result, I get to do that at this larger company again, which is 90,000 people globally. But for us, I get to work across other groups that are also thinking about what are trends that are happening today, where is the company going, and what are the opportunities for us.
Now let's talk about your portfolio. So you joined, there was already a portfolio. Of course, since you joined, more investments. How do you handle the portfolio management in a way where clearly you want to be helpful to your portfolio, but you also want to help your mothership know where to go and where not to go from your learnings? How do you what would be the best practices that you have deployed in managing your portfolio to really bring maximum value on both sides?
Yeah, we have about half of our team on the ventures group are working solely on investments. So they're looking all the time at filling the top of the funnel, talking to companies, better understanding the landscape globally because we're global investors. And then about half the folks in the group are focused on portfolio management, listening to the business, taking existing portfolio and driving in conjunction, sometimes with BHP Invent, maybe a pilot, or driving a knowledge share or better understanding or sharing a trend internally.
Wow. Okay, I have a few questions, but first golden nugget is half your team is investment team, half is really about portfolio management and engagement. Do you see a difference in terms of team composition and sourcing between the two? Are you looking more at external for one and more internal for the other? How are you thinking about the team, where they come from?
Effectively, if you look at the types of engagements that those two teams have primarily, you could certainly classify them as the investors being external and portfolio being more internally focused. Having said that, both teams also are external and internal, if you will. So we've had a great opportunity. Mel Bergen is the name of the woman that runs portfolio management out of Melbourne. And she's had a great opportunity to speak at conferences and raise our portfolio and awareness in Australia, for example, or in other markets. Jack, as well, a member of my teams in Singapore, who also has been involved in speaking at events in Asia, speaking at events in Japan and in Singapore, which is an incredibly active environment. So it's so exciting to have somebody in that region. And so those folks would be considered portfolio, but they are also external facing, gathering information as well as they continue to mature what's required internally on the portfolio side. The investors are certainly looking for deal flow all the time, and investors get deal flow from the portfolio team from activities that they're doing in their particular regions or countries. So I think it's a really nice balance of both internal and external.
Very nice. Now let's talk about investment and the best practices that comes from that. How do you decide a topic or a space you want to invest in?
We definitely have continued to invest thematically in the same way that BHP has invested before I joined. So we think about how we look at our value chain and how we can bring particular expertise to that value chain. And that starts in our instance with exploration. So how do we find particular minerals we might be looking for? So that's a category that we're looking at. What are technologies that can help us learn more from exploration? The second category that we're very interested in is how we think about processing of those minerals. So how do we think about perhaps getting more copper out of a particular ore body or rock? And what's the process for doing that? And how are new technologies involving that? And then we think about operational efficiency. How do we just do things better, faster, cheaper? And what does that look like? And we do them more in a safer way. So safety is important for industrial companies. That's very important to BHP. And then we also think about categories that give us a view as to how technologies are developing. So those are four broad categories that we invest in, that we articulate to investors, that are our main areas. And you can imagine even within those four, there's a lot of room to look at a lot of different things, which we like, because again, things are changing so quickly. We don't want to create a filter such that we may not see something that could be applicable to mining, although perhaps the startup hadn't thought about mining previously.
We've worked with BHP Ventures, and we always find the team to be so knowledgeable, domain experts, and that makes for better investors. So maybe we can speak to that. How much do you think your superpowers as BHP Ventures, as a VC firm, comes from the fact you have BHP behind you?
Certainly, that is our calling card, is this incredible company that is 140 years old, that has deep expertise in mining as the largest mining company, operating the largest copper mine called Escondida outside of Chile, comes with amazing expertise. And so for us at BHP Ventures, we really get to leverage that and bring that value to our portfolio companies. And that's a very different value proposition.
What I find very interesting is AI, especially since 2022 with ChatGPT, the challenge has moved from number of tokens to gigawatts. And powering AI is creating such an amazing opportunity for a company like you and the CVC you run to really identify what are the most important or critical element of the supply chain, what are the critical materials, how to source them, how to extract them, how to take the best value from them. In a way, it feels like you joined BHP Ventures at the moment of an inflection point. Can you speak to these macro trends and what that means for you and your team?
Certainly, the spotlight on critical minerals that's happened the last year and a half, where the idea of mining is brought in, I think, to the public discourse as people are thinking about supply chains in particular. And perhaps really that goes back to COVID when there was an opportunity to feel the dislocation in supply chains because so much of that international commerce was shut down. And by focusing upstream and focusing on mining, it's given us up an opportunity also to bring awareness in the marketplace about the good things that BHP is doing, how we go about the type of work that we're doing, how we see ourselves globally as we continue to do that good work. And that's really been, I think, an incredible opportunity for us to tell our story outside of Australia. So sometimes we're referred to as the big Australian. Many people in Australia know of us, but perhaps in other jurisdictions are not aware. And so the way that this macro trend has put a light on it, I think it's really given us an opportunity to share the good work we've done for 140 years and what we aspire to do in the future. So sustainability and decarbonization is still something that's top of mind for ventures, and it's part of that operational efficiency. So how we are thinking about the cost of energy, lower cost energy. We entered into a PPA arrangement for Escondido, which is the largest copper mine in the world. And as a result, much of what's being generated is renewable there. And I would say the Escondido one and our power purchase agreement around renewable power is one that I'm very proud of, and I know the whole company is.
Absolutely. Now, clearly, you've built a track record. What's your opinion about corporate VCs leading rounds or co-leading rounds versus not?
I certainly feel comfortable leading and co-leading rounds. So I think it's fine for corporates to do that. I think anyone that can write a term sheet with that balance and get folks on board to be able to participate should be the ones that are leading the round. Who's ever in best position to do that? And I think all of those folks in the capital stack, if they can bring value and provide capital at the right time for the right price, with the right amount of people around that's driving value, then I think anybody who's capable of delivering those things should be leading around.
I really like the way you link leading around or co-leading around with the price, the valuation. And I think this is one of the things which I remember back in 2020 when I was talking to CVC, some of them said, we're strategic, we don't care about valuation. And that was so destructive to our ecosystem because if you don't price it, maybe the entrepreneur feels good at the time, but then it's going to be terrible afterwards for the next round of funding. And so linking that huge responsibility of leading around to having the right valuation and pricing of all the risk in is so important. So I'm really glad your answer was really linking one with the other.
Absolutely. I think, especially in today's day and age, but certainly over my whole career, you have to be thinking about what the capital needs will be of the business moving forward. And that's your capital plan. Maybe you've got a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan as you're thinking about bringing product to market, what you're expecting, and how you're going to fund that growth, how you're going to fund that development is really an important key. And those things can't be viewed in isolation without thinking about the capital. You need that. And being able to raise in the future, as you say, is often based on the round that's presented today and how that's going to impact the future. So I think investors are certainly savvy to that for sure. And making sure there's the right round today. I think maybe, I don't know, maybe what's your opinion? Do you think there's more discipline around that today than there has been in the past?
Absolutely. I'm sure we have many CVCs who are not yet acting with the discipline needed, like a financial VC. But if I look at all the CVCs we work with, I think the financial discipline is being applied, the understanding of the power law, the discipline of looking at everything that can go wrong, the understanding of how big it could get so that you can get fund returners. Even I see GCV inviting top VCs to the events of CVCs, and I see the VCs wanting to engage with CVCs more and more. And I think all of that is creating this virtuous circle, showing the best CVCs and hopefully pulling the ones that didn't behave. And by the way, I don't believe for a second that people in CVCs wake up in the morning saying, I want to be a bad CVC. Some of it is constrained by what the mothership believes should be happening. Maybe they don't have the training or they don't have the exposure. And that's why this podcast, but also the GCV and even Kaufman Fellows and other organizations can be so helpful to raise the bar and the financial discipline that goes with it.
Absolutely. I think it's good, frankly, for startups in our ecosystem when we can really partner and that financial VCs can see the benefit of having a strategic on the cap table because it's a unique, again, value add that they bring based on what the corporate parent is able to provide. That provides something that financial VCs will never be able to provide in terms of learning or training or leverage, access to market intelligence. And I love seeing that partnership as opposed to perhaps in the past when there was less collaboration among those shareholders.
Very nice. Now, my last question is about what it is that you are looking at now, or your team is looking at, or that's very exciting for the next 12 to 18 months.
Yes, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say AI and ML, specifically physical AI. So we made an investment at a company called Field AI. We've participated now in 2 rounds with them. We're very excited about that. We were very early on, almost 2 years ago now, we made our first investment in them, and that's the AI brains for robots. So how those applications, specifically in the industrial space, are evolving is so exciting. So that's one area, physical AI, but then also just the general application of AI and ML in the industrial setting. So how can we learn quickly through those trends and where does it make sense to deploy them? Of course, there are folks internally at BHP, that's their sole focus. It's not my sole focus, but if there are things that I can learn for how those technologies are developing and bring them back to the incredible folks internally that are responsible for those initiatives, I think that's really an exciting space for the industrial companies.
I agree on everything you said. Laurel, thank you so much for sharing best practices, your learnings, your opinions, and how you see our industry moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicolas. I really enjoyed it.